Hey everyone, this is Lee from the 3D Modeler and welcome back to my channel. First of all, thank you so much for your support, I truly appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed yet to our channel, please don't forget to click the subscribe button. Today in part 2 of our series on creating 3D furniture models suitable for production, I will walk you through the process of texturing the contemporary nightstand cabinet model we created using 3ds Max in part 1. So, let's get started. Now we are in 3ds Max, and as you can see here it is our contemporary nightstand cabinet we created using 3ds Max in part 1. And let's start the texturing process. First I will select the most outer layer of our cabinet, Alt Q to isolate it, then press F4 to enable edge faces. Now from the modify panel, as you can see, since we have created our model using a non-destructive workflow, I need to collapse this layer into a single layer. So I will select the layer beneath the chamfer modifier layer, right click and collapse to. Now I have a layer which represents the low poly model, followed by a chamfer modifier layer which chamfer the edges of the model, followed by a turbo smooth layer which represents the high poly model. Now I will select the edible poly layer and I will apply an unwrap UV modifier to it to start the unwrapping process of our object. But first, let me arrange our working space. So I will move our model aside like this, zoom out a little bit like this. Then I will open the UV editor window and I will put it aside like this. Now we are ready to start the unwrapping process. I will divide our 3D object into a group of UV elements. Each UV element represents a surface of our object based on its orientation will carry the texture information for that surface. As shown, I have divided our surface into upper, bottom, front, and back surfaces. Each will be represented by a UV element. I will start by unwrapping the upper surface of our model. And I will start by selecting this group of segment. And since I have enabled ignore back facing, when I select this group of segments, only the group of segments facing the camera will be selected. And then after selecting this group of segment, I will press the grow button, then quick planar mapping like this. Now we have created our first element. The same process, I will select this group of segments like this, press grow, then quick planar mapping like this, then this segment, press grow, deselect this segment, quick planar mapping like this, then this segment, press grow, then deselect this segment, quick planar mapping like this, and the last element, I will select this segment, press grow, deselect these segments, then quick planar mapping like this. And as you can see, we have divided the upper surface of our model into a group of elements. And we will attach or stitch this group of elements to form a single 2D element which carries the texture information of the upper surface of our model. But first, let's talk about this element. Let me enable select by element. As you can see, this element represents a curved area in our surface, and we have unwrapped it using a planar mapping. This might cause a little bit of stretching in the UVs in this area. And to deal with this problem, we will use an option called Relax Until Flat. By double-clicking on this option, now we have relaxed the UVs in this area and the stretching will be minimalized. Now we will select the same curved area, then double-click on Relax Until Flat, and now we are ready to stitch this element to form our 2D element which will carry the texture information of the upper surface of our model. But first, we need to be sure that all the elements representing our object has size proportional to each other. And to do so, I will select all elements in our viewport and I will use an option called Back Normalized. By pressing on Back Normalize, now I'm sure that all the elements in representing our object has a size proportional to each other. Now let's select the group of elements which represent the upper surface of our object. Zoom in and let's start stitching these elements together. Now I want to stitch this element with this element. So I will disable select by element and enable select by edges, and I will select these group of edges. And as you can see in the viewport, this group of edges will be connected to these group of edges. So I will press on stitch option like this. Now we have stitched this element with this element. Then I will select these group of edges like this and press stitch, then these group of edges and press stitch, and finally this group of edges and press stitch. As you can see, we have stitched all the elements representing the upper surface of our object together to form a single element. But before we say it's done, I will double click on relax until flat to be sure that our UVs are relaxed as possible. Now we have created a single 2D element which will carry the texture information of the upper surface of our model. Now let me show you the effect of the unwrapping we have done until now. So let's open our material editor and let's create a new V-Ray material. And I will add a checker map to its diffusion slot. I will increase the tiling to 25 by 25 and let's assign our new material to our object. Now I will disable the edge faces mode by pressing F4, and as you can see, the upper surface of our object has a correct texturing information and it is perfectly unwrapped, and you can see the difference between the area we have worked on and the area we still haven't worked on. Now let's start unwrapping the front surface of our object. In this area I want a uniform flow of texture across the surface, and to do so let's open our UV editor window and let's start selecting the group of segments representing the front surface of our object. Now let's click on Quick Planar Mapping and let's move our new UV element aside and zoom in. As mentioned before, I want the texture to have a uniform flow across the surface, and to do so we need to convert this UV element into a straightened UV element. And to do so, in 3ds Max I will select these group of segments which represent the curved part in our element, and I will use the break option to detach this part from our element. Then I will use the option straighten selection, and as you can see the curved part is converted into a straightened part. Then I will select this group of segments and break, then straighten selection, and now I need to stitch all these elements together to form a single straightened UV element. But before doing so, I will select these vertices and I will click on align horizontally, and these vertices align horizontally. Then I will select these vertices and align vertically, and these vertices and click on align vertically. Now let's start the stitching. I will select this edge, press stitch, then this edge, then stitch, then this edge, stitch, and the last one, this edge, and press stitch. And as you can see, as you can see, now we have created a straighten UV element which will carry the texture information of the front surface of our object. And as you can see here in the perspective viewport, the texture has a uniform flow across the surface. And this is how you can straighten UVs in 3ds Max. But since we have used the straighten option to straighten our UV element, this might cause some stretching in the texture applied at the curved area. And this is because we have converted the curved part into a straight part. But at the same time, we have preserved the uniform flow of the texture across the surface. In our example model here, we are going to use a grained wood texture, so the amount of stretching won't be noticeable. Now, we still have to unwrap the bottom and the back surfaces of our object, and since I'm going to use the same unwrapping techniques, I will finish unwrapping our object and I will be right back. I am back, and as you can see, I have finished the unwrapping of all the object surfaces, and we still have only one step to go, which is to be sure that all the UV elements is size proportional to each other. And to do so, I will select all the UV elements and I will use the back normalized option. Now I can say the unwrapping process of our object is done. Now let's inspect our high poly model. As you can see, our high poly model is perfectly unwrapped and has a correct texturing information. Now let's exit the isolation mode, and as you can see, the most outer layer of our nightstand cabinet is fully unwrapped. Now I will start the unwrapping of this object and this object. And since I will be using the same unwrapping techniques, I will finish unwrapping these objects and I will be right back. I am back and I have finished the unwrapping process of both objects, and as you can see, both objects are perfectly unwrapped and have a correct texturing information. Now let's exit the isolation mode to check our nightstand cabinet, and as you can see, the unwrapping process of our nightstand cabinet is almost done. So let's unwrap the back of our cabinet. And as you can see, the back of our cabinet is a minor asset. So I want a quick method to unwrap such an object. And to do so, I will isolate the back of our cabinet and I will collapse the layer beneath the chamfer to a single low poly layer. Then I will add an unwrap modifier to it. Let's open the UV editor and let's select all the element in the UV editor. And the option I will use to make a quick unwrapping for such an asset is from mapping, flat mapping, press OK. And as you can see, our object is quickly unwrapped, and as mentioned, this is a minor asset which won't be seen by the camera, so I won't put a lot of effort in unwrapping such an asset. Now let's add the checker material to the back of our cabinet and let's exit the isolation mode. And as you can see, the back of our nightstand is quickly and efficiently unwrapped. And finally, we need to unwrap the drawer of our nightstand cabinet. So let's isolate the nightstand drawers and from the modify panel, let's collapse all the layers beneath the chamfer layer to form a new editable poly layer representing our low poly model. Then add an unwrap UV WMAP modifier to it, and let's open the UV editor windows. Let's talk a little bit about the drawers. The only faces or the only surfaces of the drawer that will be facing the camera are the front surfaces of the drawer, while the rest of the drawer will be textured by a plane of white color. So we need to be sure that the front surfaces of the drawer are perfectly unwrapped. And to do so, I will select all the elements in our UV editor window, and I will also use the flat mapping option. Okay, now let's select the elements which represent the front surfaces of our drawers. So let me enable select by element. So this element represents the front surface of the first drawer, and this element represents the front surface of the second drawer. The rest of the elements represent the rest of the drawers, and as mentioned before, they are insignificant since they will be textured using a plain of white color. So I can readjust their sizes in the UV space. Let me reduce their sizes in the UV space, and let's bring the elements which represent the front surfaces of our cabinet drawers. Now let's assign the checker material to our object, and let's exit the isolation mode. And as you can see, the unwrapping process of our nightstand cabinet is almost done. And finally, let's unwrap our wooden handle. So I will select it, isolate it. And as you can see, our wooden handle is a high poly model. We want to convert this high poly model into a low poly model. And to do so, let's go to the line layer, but let me enable show end result. And we'll reduce the interpolation step from 6 to 2. And from the lathe modifier layer, I will reduce the segments count from 32 to 16. Let's delete this editor poly layer and create a new editor poly layer. And I will select this border, control click on select by vertices and collapse these vertices into a single vertex. Then I will select this border, delete because I don't need these back segments. Now let's add a turbo smooth modifier to our object, and as you can see, we are back to our high poly model. Now let's select the edible poly layer, right click, collapse to create an edible poly layer representing our low poly model. Now let's add an unwrap UV WMAP modifier to it, and let me adjust the position of our handle in the perspective viewport. And now let's open our UV editor window. Now I will divide our object into a group of UV elements, and I will do so by adding seams to certain areas of our object, and I will do so by converting edges into seam. So let me enable select by edges, and let's select this edge, double click on it to select this loop of edges, and I will use the option convert edge selection to seams. Now we have added a seam to this area of our object. Now I will select this loop of edges, convert edges into seams, and I will select this loop of edges and convert edges into seams like this. Then I will go to the left view, and I will select this loop of edges and deselect these edges like this. Then I will convert edges into seams. Then let's open our UV editor window. Now let's assign the checker material to our handle, and let's use the quick peel option. And as you can see, our handle is divided into a group of UV element based on the seams we have added to the certain areas of our object. The most important element is this one, which represent the front surface of our handle, which will be facing the camera, and it is perfectly unwrapped. The rest of the handle is represented by this UV element. I can straighten this UV element using the straighten option. I can also straighten this UV element. Now I will select all, back normalized, and as you can see now, our handle is perfectly unwrapped, although there is a seam at this area here, but this seam won't be obvious. First of all, this is a small asset. Second, we are sure that the front surface facing the camera are perfectly unwrapped. And finally, we are going to use a grained wood texture, so this seam won't be obvious. Now let's exit the isolation mode and let's copy this handle and move it downward like this. Let me adjust its position and let's delete this one. And as you can see, now I can say that the unwrapping process of our nightstand cabinet is done. Now to the final step before moving to the fun part of creating our texture map. And the final step is packing our UVs. But first, let's talk a little bit about the UV space. The UV space is a storage space which will carry and store the texture information of any 3D object. But this storage space is limited in capacity, so we must make the most of this limited available storage space. Back to our nightstand cabinet, and since the outer and the inner layer of our nightstand cabinet will be textured with the same grained wood texture, so I want to pack the UV elements of this 3D object into a single UV space that will be then rendered to create the UV template that will be used later in Photoshop to create the texture maps. And to do so, we need to attach all these 3D objects together. But before doing so, let me make a copy of our nightstand cabinet. Select our nightstand cabinet, Shift drag to make a copy, Alt key to isolate it. Then I will select all the objects that will be attached together, Alt key to isolate them. Then I will start deleting the turbo smooth and the chamfer modifier from each one of them, like this. Then I will select all, right click and convert to editor poly. Then I will select any one of them, right click, attach, and I will start attach all the objects together. Now we can add an unwrap modifier to our new 3D object, and let's open our UV editor and let's adjust the position of our new object in the perspective viewport like this. In the UV editor window, let's select all the UV elements and click on pack normalized. And now let's talk a little bit about packing our UVs. We will classify our UV elements into important UV elements representing surfaces that will be seen by the render camera, and insignificant UV elements representing surfaces that are hidden from the camera. So let me enable select by element and let's select our first UV element. As you can see, this UV element represents a surface that will be seen by the camera. So it is categorized as an important UV element. I will drag it aside like this. Then let's select this UV element. This UV element also represents a surface that will be seen by the camera. So it is categorized as important UV element. Let's select this UV element. And as you can see, this UV element represents a surface that will be hidden from the camera, so it will be categorized as insignificant UV element. Then I will select this element. It is also hidden, so it is categorized as insignificant UV element. This UV element might be seen by the camera, so it will be important UV element. I will drag it beside the important UV elements. Then this UV element represents a hidden surface, so it is insignificant UV element. This UV element is insignificant because it is hidden. This UV element will be seen by the camera, so it is an important UV element. This element is insignificant. This element is important because it will be seen. This element is important because it will also be seen by the render cam. And finally, this one is insignificant because it won't be seen by the camera. And as you can see, I have classified our UV elements into important UV elements that will be seen by the render camera and insignificant UV elements that are hidden from our render cam. And we are doing so because, as mentioned before, our UV space has a limited available capacity. And we want to preserve most of this capacity for our important UV elements, and the rest will be for the insignificant UV elements. Now, let me arrange the position of our UV elements, and I will be right back. We are back and I have finished arranging our UV elements, and now let's start baking our UV element in our available UV space. Now I will select our important UV elements and I will start increasing their sizes in the UV space so they will cover as much as possible of our available UV space like this. Now let's select the insignificant UV element and let's move them inside our UV space, and we can also, if required, can reduce their sizes since they are insignificant UV element and they won't be seen by the render cam. And this is how you can efficiently bake your UV element in our available UV space. And finally, let's render our UV template from Tools, Render UV Template. I will go with 2K resolution, 2048 by 2048, and then press on Render UV Template. Then save it, UVs underscore grained underscore wood.def. I will go with 16-bit color, and I always check Store Alpha Channel. Press OK. Now we have saved our UV template as TIFF file. Now I will do the same process of baking the UVs and render the UV template for all the remaining objects of our contemporary nightstand cabinet. Then we'll be ready to move to Photoshop to create the texture maps. But this will be done in part 3. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me and motivate me to create even more awesome content for you. See you in the next one.